One evening in late September 1937, Charles S. Ross, the wealthy president of a greeting card company, was driving toward Chicago when he was pulled over and kidnapped at gunpoint by a pair of criminals. The ensuing investigation quickly became one of the largest for the young FBI. It did not end well for Ross, who was murdered on October 10th, along with one of the criminals, after a fight broke out between the two kidnappers. It didn't end well for the mastermind of the plot either. John Henry Seidland, who had a long history of run-ins with the law, crisscrossed the country after obtaining $50,000 in ransom money, but was ultimately tracked to Los Angeles using serial numbers from the bills. Agents posed as cashiers at a local racetrack where the ransom money had been used and arrested Ross on January 10, 1938, after he tried to place a bet with one of the bills. Seidland confessed to the kidnapping and murders. John Henry Seidland, characterized as a cold-blooded and ruthless kidnapper and murderer, as well as a lone bank bandit, counted off the last 24 hours of his life on July 13, 1938, in Chicago, Illinois. On the early morning of July 14, 1938, Seidland was executed in the electric chair for the abduction and murder of Charles Sherman Ross. The date of his death was exactly 13 days prior to the day upon which he would have celebrated his 28th birthday, as John Henry Seidland was born on July 27, 1910. On October 19, 1937, when it was evident that the victim of this crime was not to be returned by his abductors, the FBI began to unravel the carefully woven web surrounding the crime committed by Seidland. Every available resource at the command of the FBI was thrown into action to assist in the solution of the crime, which, according to Seidland's own statement, he deemed a perfect crime. For almost 4 months, each clue was looked at to identify and locate the individual responsible for the crime. The wide ramifications of the investigative activities of the FBI reached beyond the territorial limits of the continental United States. Thus was conducted one of the most widespread and intensive manhunts ever engaged in by the FBI, utilizing the most modern means of scientific crime detection. The pursuit of the FBI was maintained until Seidland was located and apprehended, as the result of a carefully planned trap set into operation by special agents under the direct personal supervision of Director Hoover at the Santa Anita racetrack near Los Angeles, California on January 14, 1938. The resolution of this kidnapping revealed that there is no honor among criminals in their associations with their own kind. James Atwood Gray, one of the abductors, was apparently killed to avoid splitting the $50,000 ransom. It appears that Seidland believed that by destroying the only living witnesses of this crime, he would destroy every link by which his detection might be possible. However, his uncontrollable desire to gamble at the racetrack resulted in his detection, location, and apprehension. On the evening of Saturday, September 25, 1937, Charles Sherman Ross drove his big sedan down North Avenue toward Chicago, Illinois. On the seat beside him was his former secretary and lifetime friend, Miss Florence Freihaeg. The gray-haired 72-year-old retired president of the George S. Carrington Greeting Card Manufacturing Company of Chicago, Illinois, headed for Grand Avenue just south of the Chicago suburb of Franklin Park. "The car behind has been following us for some time and displaying unusually bright lights," Ross stated. His voice indicated that he was noticeably alarmed. "I don't like the looks of this. I'll cut over to the side and let him pass." Ross swung his car over to the side of the road, and the other car veered sharply in front, blocking it from going forward. Seidland promptly jumped out with a revolver in his hand, and after quickly walking over to the Ross car, he tried to open the door beside the driver's seat, but it was locked. Seidland tapped the revolver against the glass of the door of the car and threatened to shoot Ross if he did not immediately open the door. Ross complied, and after being quickly searched, was forced into the abductor's car that was being driven by James Atwood Gray. Seidland explained in a commanding voice, "This is a kidnapping," and curtly said, "My boss told me to bring you along." Miss Freihaeg protested, explaining that Ross had a weak heart and other ailments. Miss Freihaeg observed that Seidland's hair was curly and his face pointed, and that he seemed youthful and nervous. After Seidland looked Miss Freihaeg over suspiciously, he said in a barking voice, "What are you, his daughter or his sweetheart?" She replied, "No, I am just a friend." Seidland pressed the gun into Freihaeg's shoulder and asked her, "How much can he give us? $500,000, $250,000? She replied that she did not know and pleaded with Seidlin not to take Ross away and offered him the money she had with her. Seidlin took $85 from her purse and ordered her to lie on the floor of the Ross automobile while he and Gray drove off in the kidnap car with Ross. Before departing, Seidlin warned, "Don't call the police after we have gone or we'll kill him." Miss Freihage complied with the demands of Seidlin, cringing with fear on the front seat of the Ross automobile, until she heard the kidnapper's car race away into the darkness of the night. Then, looking up cautiously, she observed the red rear light of the kidnapper's car moving in the darkness and attempted to follow it. The kidnap car outdistanced her, and she stopped at the first available telephone to call the police. Thus began what for almost 4 months was the Ross kidnapping mystery. With Ross carefully guarded and safely out of the reach of any alarm that might have been circulated for them, the kidnappers proceeded into Wisconsin and across into Minnesota, where by late Sunday they reached the hideout near Emily, Minnesota. There in the woods was a cold, dark dugout that had been skillfully prepared by Seidlin and Gray to further their criminal enterprises. John Henry Seidlin immediately set into motion the negotiations for the payment of the ransom by dictating a letter for Ross to write. However, Ross refused to ask for more than $5,000 ransom. Seidlin took the letter, studied it, and seeing where he could change it to $50,000, did so. He then took the ransom letter south and mailed it, thereafter moving into Chicago, Illinois. The first ransom extortion letter was received on September 30th, 1937. It was transmitted to Harvey S. Brackett, a former business associate of Ross at Green Bay, Wisconsin, through the U.S. mails in violation of the federal extortion statute. The letter read as follows: "Dear Dick, I am held for ransom. I have stated I am worth $100,000, including the G.S. Carrington Company stock held in escrow by First National Bank. Try and raise $50,000. I am held for ransom. I have stated I am worth $100,000, including the G.S. Carrington Company stock held in escrow by First National Bank. Try and raise $50,000. Yours, Charles S. Ross. Contact Harvey S. Brackett. Say nothing to anyone except Harvey. All communications will be addressed to Williams Bay." It is apparent from the above letter that it was intended to be mailed to Mrs. Charles S. Ross, as Dick was the affectionate term with which Ross greeted his wife. However, to keep the ransom negotiations secret, it was forwarded by Seidlin with the following letter addressed to Harvey S. Brackett. "Dear Harvey S. Brackett, have payment ready on instant notice to be delivered by employee of Harley-Davidson Company on motorcycle. Road to be designated later rider to drop bag on highway at signal a shot or repeated flashes of light. Rider to then continue forward for 300 yards and turn off road on left side. To continue farther would be fatal. Money to be contained in small leather bag of following denomination. 20% payment value in $5, 50%, $10, 30%, and $20. All money to be non-consecutive and unmarked and of authentic origin. When ready, insert following ad in Chicago Tribune, used cars for sale department, Dodge. Good cond, no defect. Amount, over amount ready. Example, $500 for $50,000, $25 for $2,500, name of rider, and address Harvey. You are to hire a motorcycle rider from Harley-Davidson Company and get name and address. Say nothing to anyone except Dick, your friend Charles S. Ross, for AB." This letter was postmarked September 29, 1937, at Savannah, Illinois, and was in the handwriting of Ross. An advertisement was placed in the indicated Chicago newspaper in conformity with the instructions of the kidnapper. Seidlin, upon being assured of the compliance with his demands for the payment of the ransom, returned to the hideout near Emily, Minnesota, where he took photographs of Ross holding in front of him an October 2, 1937, late edition of a Chicago, Illinois newspaper. He did this to show the well-being of Ross as of that date, thus establishing the authenticity of the ransom negotiations. Seidlin then returned to Chicago, Illinois, where he purchased a typewriter and set in motion what he believed to be an ingenious scheme for the payment of the ransom demanded. He prepared 3 additional ransom extortion communications. The second ransom extortion letter was postmarked at Chicago, Illinois on October 2, 1937, addressed to Mr. Olden C. Armitage, a lodge associate of Ross, and read as follows: "Mr. Armitage, please keep this confidential. You are Chaz S. Ross's last hope. His own choice as middleman. Somehow contact Mrs. Ross using a third person or some other devious means at any cost. Don't let the feds suspect your part. Raise the $50,000 asked without using her name if possible. She'd assign notes for that amount. Her accounts are watched. All money to be bank run, non-consecutive, unmarked, and of authentic origin. IU 22,000 each of iOS and 5S. Place in small locked zipper bag. Call Canal 3542 to obtain man to deliver payment on motorcycle. Must dress in white, no sidecar. Equip for 500 miles trip, no danger if directions followed. Hold ready at your office instant notice. Conclusive proof of Ross's well-being will be tendered before payment. Locate secret photo developer. Run this ad. When note received. R. Used autos. For sale department exam. And Tribune Auburn 33 good con. No defects. Amount raised. Thus $500. Meaning $50,000 or $250 for $25,000. Add only name and address of man hired to ride cycle. Expect no contact before wed. This note nullifies all previous attempts at contract. If it fails, no others will be attempted. Non-genuine without this signature. Albie, not Brady. This note ignored the prior letter and made a similar demand for ransom. The placing of an advertisement in a Chicago paper and a motorcycle rider to deliver the ransom. Canal 3542 was determined to be the telephone number of a motorcycle agency in Chicago, Illinois, and thus it designated another motorcycle agency as a place to obtain the rider and indicated proof of Ross's well-being, apparently to be furnished by a picture. Enclosed with this ransom letter was a small piece of paper apparently cut from the front of an envelope on which appeared the wording, Mrs. Ross, 2912 Commonwealth Avenue, Chicago, Ill., in the handwriting of Charles S. Ross himself. An advertisement was placed in the designated Chicago newspaper in conformity with the instructions of the kidnapper. This note ignored the prior letter and made a similar demand for ransom, the placing of an advertisement in a Chicago paper and a motorcycle rider to deliver the ransom. Canal 3542 was determined to be the telephone number of a motorcycle agency in Chicago, Illinois, and thus it designated another motorcycle agency as a place to obtain the rider and indicated proof of Ross's well-being, apparently to be furnished by a picture. Enclosed with this ransom letter was a small piece of paper apparently cut from the front of an envelope on which appeared the wording, Mrs. Ross, 2912 Commonwealth Avenue, Chicago, Ill., in the handwriting of Charles S. Ross himself. An advertisement was placed in the designated Chicago newspaper in conformity with the instructions of the kidnapper. The third ransom extortion letter, postmarked October 6, 1937, from Chicago, Illinois, was again addressed to Elton C. Armitage and read as follows. Armitage, proof at 230 Sawabash. Receipt no IO 437, left by Elson C. Armitage 6300 W. Hunt. Ross very incensed over delays caused by Pied Pipers and their rat hunts. Threatens repercussions. Elaborate plan of collection prac. Complete. Bound to fail. If suspicion aroused at only one contact will be tried. Bend pick. Of river if cop and Vic. Rider a dress warmly. At signal. A shot. Drop bag on route. Continue 300 wideys and shove cycle over left bank walk in Sammy. Direction until accosted. Don't hold hands up or try going through. Ross delivered soon as money exchanged. 24:48 HRS map of route and time of start. Sent soon as full amount ready. Don't put under time lock as revere. To start 1/2 HR after message received. 1 by land and 2 in C if double crossed. Albie, not Brady. This letter indicated that proof of the victim's well-being could be obtained at 230 South Wabash Street. It was discovered that this was an address of a camera company, and that receipt hash 10,437 was for films left in the name of Elton C. Armitage. 10 films were obtained from this company that had been developed and showed 8 poses of Ross holding in front of him the October 2, 1937 football edition of a Chicago newspaper apparently taken in the daylight in a thicket containing birch trees. Ross was dressed in the same clothes that he wore when he was kidnapped. This letter indicated that Ross would be held from 24 to 48 hours in order to exchange the ransom money of $50,000 demanded. Enclosed with this letter was Ross's membership card for a commercial association dated January 9, 1902, on the back of which appeared the signature of Ross. Also enclosed was the automobile registration card of 1937 for Ross. In compliance with the instructions of the kidnapper, an advertisement was placed in the designated Chicago newspaper. The fourth ransom extortion letter was received on October 8, 1937, postmarked at Chicago, Illinois, October 7, 1937, addressed to Elton C. Armitage, and read as follows: "Everything set, let's go. Contact man to leave towns at time following each point. Start Oak Park on High, no 20 at 6 p.m., Fried Rockford 8.45, Freeport 9.40, Junction with High, no 8209, Savannah 259, Fulton 12.30 a.m., Cordova I 0, East Moline Y45, Geneseo 2, I0, Sheffield 2.59, Princeton 3.25, LaSalle 4.05, Ottawa 6, Joliet 7.05, Take High 66 to Chi. Travel 50 miles per hour, gas as often as schedule permits, eat Ottawa. Tie bag so can be released instantly on signal flashing of lights, or shot don't go further than 300 YDS from signal without ditching cycle. Continue at walk in same direction on High. We'll have reports on progress, don't tag other vehicles if possible. Know you by white clothing. Ross won't show if this contact fails on your end. If new directions given somewhere en route, follow if signed Albie. Albie, not Brady. Peace, Ross opines as how there's too much vitamin G in this mess, we agree. Dick, be home son, morn, hide the silverware until associations wear off. This letter gave detailed information of 14 places covering the distance of approximately 395 miles over which the motorcycle rider should travel, leaving Oak Park, Illinois at 6 p.m., October 8, 1937. Vitamin G in this letter, according to Seidland, referred to special agents of the FBI. The last 3 ransom extortion letters received in the Ross kidnapping case were all typewritten by John Henry Seidland. The payoff was arranged by the Ross family in strict accordance with the instructions of the kidnappers. The motorcycle rider left Oak Park, Illinois at 6 p.m., October 8, 1937, and arrived at a point about 6 miles east of Rockford, Illinois, on Highway #20 at 7:50 p.m., where he was contacted by Seidland, who drove in behind him on the highway and flashed the lights of his automobile. This was the designated signal for the motorcycle rider to pay the $50,000 ransom, and the kidnapper's instructions were immediately complied with. The money was thrown off the side of the road, and then the motorcycle rider ditched the motorcycle about 300 yards from this location, proceeding on foot pursuant to the instructions of the kidnappers. Seidland picked up the ransom money and thereafter returned over a circuitous route to the hideout at Emily, Minnesota, arriving there sometime on October 9, 1937. The ransom money at this point was divided, $30,000 being Seidland's share, while James Atwood Gray received the remaining $20,000. On the night of October 9, 1937, Seidland, together with Gray, left in Seidland's automobile, together with Charles S. Ross, to the hideout approximately 17 miles northwest of Spooner, Wisconsin. They arrived at the hideout at 7 a.m., October 10, 1937. At this point, Seidland claims he believed Gray was about to attack him, and they struggled. All three, Seidland, Gray, and Ross, fell into the pit. In falling, according to Seidland, he shot Gray while Ross was knocked out by the fall. Believing Gray could not recover, Seidland emptied his gun into Gray's body, killing him. Then, not being able to revive Ross, and to make certain he was dead, Seidland shot him through the head. The body of Gray was already in the pit, and Ross's body was also placed therein. Seidland closed the trap door and covered the pit over with dirt and brush. This occurred about 3 p.m. on October 10, 1937. At about 5 p.m., October 10, 1937, Seidland then proceeded in the automobile, and a short distance north of Walker, Minnesota, to the east of Highway 371, he buried the typewriter box, which had previously contained the typewriter used in writing the last 3 ransom letters, in which Seidland had concealed $32,645, all of which he believed was ransom money. Thereafter, he proceeded to Omaha, Nebraska, and other points in the Midwest, then to Spokane, Washington. At Spokane, on November 2, 1937, he disposed of the automobile used in the kidnapping, and he picked up another sedan that was later recovered in his possession at Los Angeles, California, January 14, 1938. He then proceeded east to various points, including Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Miami, Tropical Park, Miami, Florida, New Orleans, and Fairgrounds Racetrack, New Orleans, Denver, Pecos, Texas, and then to Los Angeles, arriving there January 10, 1938. On October 18, 1937, Mrs. Ross released a message to the kidnappers for the return of her husband, warning that if they did not return him, all law enforcement officers would make vigorous efforts to locate and punish those responsible. The next day, no word having been received from the kidnappers. The ransom lists, prepared by the FBI, containing the serial numbers of the bills comprising the $50,000 ransom, were forwarded to all available sources throughout the entire nation, with the request that everyone be on the lookout for any of the bills bearing serial numbers contained in the ransom list. Shortly thereafter, the ransom money was identified in scattered sections of the United States. Each identification was carefully and meticulously investigated by the FBI in order to trace the source and to determine the modus operandi employed in changing this ransom money. In this way, the trail of the kidnapper was followed step by step as the ransom bills were being turned in by public-spirited citizens to whom the FBI had supplied lists of the serial numbers of the bills in the $50,000 ransom package given to Seidlund on the evening of October 8, 1937. In the early part of January 1938, upon the disclosure that ransom bills were being identified at the Federal Reserve Bank, the Bank of America at Los Angeles, California, Director Hoover immediately made plans to go to Los Angeles, California, so that he might personally direct the investigation. This ransom money was traced to the Santa Anita racetrack near Los Angeles, California. Director Hoover ordered a trap to be set at the Santa Anita racetrack, and with the cooperation of the track officials, FBI agents were placed behind betting wickets as change carriers, ready to check each suspected bill against the ransom list. Other agents waited nearby and watched for the pre-arranged signal to close in on everyone identified as passing a Ross ransom bill. The checking of the serial numbers was not an easy task because of the speed with which bets were being made. The difficulty is best reflected in that at the Santa Anita track there were 500 pari-mutuel ticket sellers and 500 cashiers on the day this surveillance was placed in effect. From $400,000 to $1 million daily was passing through the pari-mutuel windows at this racetrack. The agents made the best of the situation, keeping a patient watch for the bettors who would try to pass a ransom bill on the counter. The vigil proved worthwhile when on January 14, 1938, a man walked up to the betting window, requested a ticket on a certain horse in the third race, and produced in payment a bill which, on quick inspection by an agent, proved to be a part of the ransom money paid in vain for the safe return of Ross. At a prearranged signal, special agents closed in on the man, who was in fact Seidlund, without causing any commotion, and rushed him to the Los Angeles field office of the FBI. The sum of $14,512.18 was found in this man's possession, part of which was on his person, in his automobile, and at his hotel room in Los Angeles, California. Of this money, $5,620 was found to be the Ross ransom money. This $14,521.18 recovered included $18.80 obtained on winning tickets held by Seidlund in connection with the races. The individual who gave his name as Peter Ander, but whose real name was John Henry Seidlund, a former logger in the Pacific Northwest, was not overcome by the sudden turn of events or by the mass of damaging evidence against him, but coolly and calmly denied his guilt of the Ross abduction to Director Hoover. He claimed he had obtained the money from known bank robber acquaintances at a large reduction, indicating that he knew the money he had in his possession was the fruits of crime. He denied any participation whatsoever in the Charles S. Ross kidnapping case until he was questioned at length by Director Hoover, and then John Henry Seidlund made a complete confession that consisted of a 28-page signed statement in which were included details of his life of crime, his admission of his participation in the Charles S. Ross kidnapping, as well as the killing of Ross and his own accomplice, James Atwood Gray. Subsequent to the complete confession on January 17, 1938, Seidlund was flown to Minnesota, where FBI agents planned a trip into the snow-covered lands of North Woods. There, Seidlund admitted he had secretly buried the two murdered men, as well as a typewriter case full of ransom money. This was a hunt, not for the living, as in other manhunts, but for the dead, bullet-ridden bodies hidden in the woods by John Henry Seidland. In this search, FBI agents dug up a $32,645 ransom cash, found the kidnappers' underground hideout, and the dugout that contained the bodies of Charles S. Ross and Seidland's accomplice, James Atwood Gray.